Hello everyone, I'm Eric Sperling. Thank you for joining All in Education's Paque Sepas. I'd like to welcome today's experts. With us as always, we have Stephanie Parra. She is the Executive Director at All in Education. And on the couch today, we have Dr. George Barnes. He is the Superintendent at Balls Elementary School District. And Dr. Gabe Trujillo. He is the Superintendent at Tucson Unified School District. Thank you all for being here. Before we get into the panel, a little bit about All in Education. All in Education is a local nonprofit organization that exists to build in Arizona where all communities have access to opportunity and justice. Now, their work is focused on strengthening the Latino community by closing the representation gap to build power, influence, and authority across Arizona boardrooms and classrooms. Through Paque Sepas, All in Education has been working to bridge their advocacy efforts to be inclusive of multiple factors outside of the classroom that are impacting the educational outcomes of students. They're calling these factors the social determinants of education. Now, the focus of Paque Sepas is on having real, thought-provoking conversations with leaders and community members and identifying solutions to work towards creating meaningful changes in the systems meant to serve our communities. Now, this season will exclusively focus on the issue of poverty, the social determinant of education that, through an analysis, All in Education found was the leading factor that had the greatest negative impact on the welfare of families, communities, students, and schools. So today's episode is going to focus on how we define and talk about poverty in schools. Now, the conversation will center on how students are impacted by not only their personal home experience with poverty, but how attending a school with high percentage of students from low-income families and neighborhoods has an effect on their success and the quality of their education. So Stephanie, let's start this conversation with you. Talking about this episode description, I think the thing that really caught our attention was that, and maybe this is a little bit of a myth buster too, but for families that experience poverty at home, they're also more likely to attend a school that's under-resourced. And you start thinking, like, don't all schools just provide students with similar resources and academic offerings? But that's not always the case, is it?
That's not always the case.
Okay.
I mean, that's what we would hope, right? That the system would actually provide opportunities in an equitable way to every single student that the system serves. But unfortunately, by design, schools who are serving high populations of low-income families have access to less resources. And actually, just recently, Arizona introduced what they call a poverty weight, an opportunity weight into the state's funding formula. But that was as recent as a couple of years ago, okay. And we were only one of 6 states that did not have this additional funding for low-income schools serving this population of students. So again, by design, students that are growing up in low-income households have access to less resources, and what we see in these schools also are often overwhelmed with having to be social service agencies, yeah. And we're just not equipped to do that in an effective way.
So some huge obstacles there. Dr. Barnes, let's talk about your situation. Can you give us some perspective on what the student demographic looks like in the makeup of your school district?
Sure, thank you. You know, Balls Elementary School District is it's about as far east of Phoenix you can go, okay. A little bit west of Tempe. We're about 2,250 students, very small, maybe 4 miles radius in regards to our actual area that we serve. Within that area, we have about 65% of students that would identify as Latino, and then we have about 22% of students that would identify as Black or African American. The others are populated by others, small percentage of white students that are there as well, indigenous population as well. And in general, about 90% or higher is in regards to poverty.
90%?
90% or higher, yeah. It's an interesting small community. What I often say is, you know, our students can see the mountains, but they can't often get to the mountaintops. We can talk about that, yeah. But being also called South Biltmore or Lower Arcadia, there's this hint of gentrification that's coming in. You know, there are some pockets that are around, but for the most part, our kids feel it. They understand and they see that their life is a little different, and they're working hard to try to figure out how to make changes in their lives to get past that point.
Dr. Trujillo, let's talk about the demographic in your population and down in Tucson.
So we're about 40,000 students. We're the 3rd largest in the state in terms of traditional public school districts. And we're about 72% students of color, the 60% Latino, Hispanic, and then 12% African American. We also have a fairly large indigenous population. We serve the communities at the Pascuayaqui community as well as the Tana Otham, operate 86 schools. And I think what makes us unique is we're sometimes a district within a district. We have some very affluent schools in the northeast sector of the district. We're about 225 square miles that encompasses the greater Tucson metro area, as well as the majority of Pima County. So we do see pockets of affluence economically in the northeast sector of the district, but then we also deal with the extreme effects of poverty in the southwest, the west, and the southern sectors of the district. So it really puts an emphasis on the work that we do in Tucson Unified to make sure that we're equity minded with the few resources that public schools get and public school districts do get. We have a responsibility to make sure that those resources are distributed equitably so that every student gets the resources that they need unique to their specific circumstances.
So with those demographics you just described, interesting challenges then for you
Very
as
interesting, yes.
decision makers. How do you do those when you're dealing with different socioeconomic levels within your own district?
Well, I think one of the things that I stress with my team and our governing board is that everybody has a clear understanding of the difference between equality and equity. So there are certain things that every child in our district is going to get, no matter where they're at. You could be at the foothills of Sabino Canyon, or you could be out near the Pascuayaqui Reservation. So when you're talking about equality, absolutely, every single child is going to get a highly qualified teacher in the room. Every single child is going to get facilities that provide the basic needs that our kids need. But when you're talking about equity, you're talking about access and opportunity to resources that poverty prevents families and students from having access to. Like where we decide to put our next preschool location, right? There's a good example of we're going to select a sector of the district that doesn't yet have a preschool program operating on a campus that is highly affected by poverty. Where we're going to decide to fund Wi-Fi hotspots. Now that the government funding is gone, we're making those decisions based off of where we have the most extreme effects of poverty. So we're always looking at what sector of the district is going to be most benefited by us kicking in the door to lack of access. Right now, our goal with regard to honors and advanced placement programs, we want 40% of the district enrolled in some type of gifted and talented instruction, AP courses. We're looking at those sectors of the district where we traditionally haven't had those courses on campuses to be able to get that done. And so that to me is the most important thing, is really understanding equity versus equality, especially when you're looking at budgeting and resources.
No, it's a great way you put that. And as we transition the conversation a little bit from students to parents, Stephanie, I want to ask you a little bit about All in Education's Parent Educator Academy. And this is really helping parents educate their children about what rights they potentially have at schools, correct?
Yeah.
We're talking about accessing these resources, the difference between equality and equity, but this program helps educate parents.
Yeah, I think for the reasons why we're having this conversation, it's really important for every single parent to understand their rights as parents and understand what their students should be afforded access to. And so, you know, it absolutely takes leadership, as from both of these two gentlemen mentioned, like leadership at the top inside of a system is absolutely critical, because if you have the right leaders in place, they're going to ensure that resources are distributed equitably across their local system. But when you don't have that leadership at the top, it could be that resources are not distributed in an equitable way. And that's where we believe that parents need to know what they have, what their rights are, and how they can be involved and engaged in their child's education to ultimately become a partner. So when we started the Parent Academy, it was really because I came to the realization when we were navigating pandemic school closures that there was this breakdown in communication between schools and families. And you know, by the time I was speaking to some parents about their child's education in mid-May, I was the first person that was on the phone speaking to them in their native language since schools closed in mid-March. And so you can imagine what the other end of the phone sounded like. Parents were incredibly frustrated, confused, not knowing what was going on, not being able to connect to the internet at that time, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And so when we created the Parent Academy, it was really meant to strengthen the relationship between schools and families. Schools that invest resources, and I know Tucson Unified does this because they're a great partner of ours in the Parent Academy, but when a school system invests resources in family engagement, they have better outcomes on the back end, better educational attainment outcomes, because parents ultimately can be a partner to the teacher, a partner to the school system, and an ally in getting their kids across the finish line. And so that's what the Parent Academy is designed to do. We now have 452 alumni that have gone through the program as of last week. We're very proud of the growth. We're in over 30 schools across Maricopa, Pima, and Yuma counties, and the program's continuing to grow. And the model's incredibly promising. And so the more families that we can serve, we're operating as urgently as we can to expand.
Man, that's impact, just hearing you talk about it the way you did and sharing some of those numbers with us. Dr. Bronze, I saw your head nodding when Dr. Trio was talking about the difference between equality and equity there. So before I ask you about how you overcome some of those barriers, I'll let you kind of, share your thoughts on that, the difference between equality and equity in schools.
I've often felt that even if you argue that it's a coincidence that certain students in certain zip codes don't have the schools that they deserve, I would counter that argument and say there's no coincidence how we don't respond to it as a nation, as a state, as a system. The issue is there. The research is there. And not being responsive to it is to my belief, extremely malicious, right? We know that there is a system of haves and have-nots, and at the very least, those of us who have not, right, don't have access to the social network to make the jumps that they need to make. So in regards to the population that I serve, in regards to these kind of students across the nation, it does take a Herculean lift and really strong leaders like these two individuals that I'm sitting in the middle of to make a change. I would dare say, and I don't know either one of them very well, but I would say that if it wasn't for an educator in each of their lives, and I know in my life, I would not have made the transition from the way I was living growing up in Chicago, in the Chicagoland area, to where I'm at now. But that took passion, that took love from individuals, and there was not a system set up for success. And what I love to hear from these two individuals and Phoenix in general, what we're trying to do, and the surrounding areas, is how do we impact students? How do we get in the lives of parents? How do we get in the lives, how do we as a community create that insulated, educated pipeline to make lives better for our students?
So as we discuss this equality and equity in education here, what are some of the barriers that you're seeing your specific student population face?
I think our families have the love aspect down, right? Okay. When you talk about how our students spend their days and their lives, and you look at the things that they don't have, I know they have love at home. To some degree, there's a negotiation of safety, depending on where our kids live. When I drive through certain areas that are considered urban, regardless of the district, there's some areas where I don't necessarily think that I would want my students growing up in, my own biological children or my grandchildren, so on and so forth, my family members. But I believe our students feel comfortable where they are, and that's a double-edged sword. The double-edged sword is that they feel safe, they feel good, but they don't understand that next life takes quite a change. That next life of being able to make sure your bills are paid on time, make sure there's food in the refrigerator. If you lose a job, being able to be marketable to go get another job. Having access to post-secondary opportunities. The barriers that I see with our students is sometimes the challenge of the mental game. The challenge of knowing that they can do greater things and be greater things. The challenge of not understanding that even though every day they feel like they're in a good enough position, there's more to life. And I think some of our kids and some of our families rest in this position because they don't understand what it means to make the next move. How many of our families aren't registered voters? How many of our families don't know who their legislative representatives are? That social networking is a big piece that I think is probably the largest obstacle for our families. And it's one of the reasons why we're so fortunate in our district and others, from what I'm hearing, the community is coming around and wrapping their arms around our kids, helping them have access to medical needs, having them access to food, having them, all those things that maybe they wouldn't have every day. But there's also some comfort in that. And so I was just speaking to some folks at a post-secondary institution, and I was reminding them that growing up, I was afraid to walk on a college campus. I wasn't afraid to walk through the streets and say all the things that I needed to say to make sure this gangster left me alone and this drug dealer knew who I was, but I was afraid to walk on a campus. So how do we make sure that our students feel comfortable walking on a campus?
Last question on this thought. I want to wrap up because this is a personal question for you. How do you approach leadership? How do you address some of these needs personally, not necessarily at the district level, but when you go into work every day, what mindset are you in to address those needs?
I'm blessed to be a superintendent, but that's not my role in life. My role in life is to work alongside great individuals, speak into them, and try to leverage anything that we possibly can to help the next generation. Some days that means being hunkered down inside of an office. Some days it feels like I never leave my car because I'm texting somebody and on the phone and trying to make sure that happens. My best days are when we're inside of a school and we're rallying the kids to do great things.
Yeah. Dr. Trujillo, as we transition this conversation a little bit more into the solutions side of things, you have families that have been sending their kids to the district, kindergarten through 12th grade. And so we'd really like to learn, and we'd love to talk about repeatable positives on this show. So what are some of the things that you have implemented over the years that have worked and that other districts or other leaders can say, that's successful, how can we apply that to our district?
Well, number one, we're blessed to be a unified system where the majority of our families that are with us actually start at preschool. And so let's start with strategy number one. To the extent that you can, universally expand early childhood education in your district. I think that is probably the most effective strategy that we have for relationships with families that will last with us a lot of times all the way through the 12th grade year. And more importantly, it gives our youngest learners a head start on literacy. We know that literacy unlocks the power of our democracy and opportunity. And for so many of our kids coming from poverty, they're not arriving to the kindergarten door coming from a literacy-rich environment where a lot of times there are no access to books, there aren't adults that are ready available to read to them because of the blue-collar needs of a lot of our families. They need to work, they need to put food on the table. So number one is early childhood education. We have preschool classrooms operating at 69 of our 86 campuses. And that's been a vision that hasn't just been mine, it's also been the vision of previous school boards and superintendents that have been able to make that come to fruition. Secondly is, as a unified district, because you have feeder school patterns and you have elementary schools that feed into middle schools and middle schools that feed into high schools, our leaders and our teacher teams are able to talk to each other vertically. We're able to establish what we call dashboard of success, where we have milestones for kids academically from kindergarten all the way up through 12th grade, reading by 3rd grade, algebra readiness by 9th, taking your first CTE course, career and technical education, by 9th. So those are just some examples of the metrics that we look at before a kid passes on to the next grade level, so that the receiving school can act on the data and be able to put interventions and resources around learners that are struggling. I think it's harder to do that when you're not a unified district because the kids that you're receiving, you don't know anything about yet. And you have to interface with a sister institution. And a lot of times it's hard to get that data. I think the third biggest strategy that we have is relationships with our parents. Once we get you at preschool or kindergarten, we want you with us all the way through 12th grade. We're going to over communicate with you. Your local school's going to be relentless in bringing you in the door and asking you to join committees, or having you come to curriculum night, or having you join one of our Parent Educator Academy groups. And that pays off for us, because this week is graduation week. And this is my favorite time of the year as superintendent, because literally every single parent I meet is going to be telling me a story about relationships, about a teacher that meant something, about an administrator that meant something, a counselor that meant something, not at 12th grade, 11th, or 10th grade, but they're going to go back and tell me what it was like at their TUSD school when their kid was in 3rd grade, and how much they contributed to the district through that relationship with us. So to me, I think those are the most important strategies.
Great example of things working. Stephanie, we've talked a lot about the work at All in Education on this show before. What are some of the things that schools are doing that's working, or that they need to be doing a little bit differently?
Yeah. So, you know, I think what we believe at All in Education is that every single school across every single community needs to be high quality. And we're working to clearly define that. But I think one of the things that we think a lot about is a focus on achievement. You know, we've talked about it's non-negotiable. Every kid should have access to a qualified educator, a high-quality educator in the classroom. Every student parents should feel welcome and supported and included in their school community. And a school that really goes above and beyond is one who thinks about the child in a whole way. It is mindful of the social determinants that are impacting the child and the family, and really is coming around to provide those wraparound support services that families need. And again, that is one thing, though, that I don't think schools can do on our own. We need community partnerships and collaboratives to wrap their arms around us. Because we don't have all of the resources to be social service agencies, but our kids really need that support.
All right, Stephanie already started a little bit of the call to action to community leaders. So this is one of our favorite parts of the show. We'll go around the panel here and just have everyone kind of echo or state their call to action for community leaders who are watching this. So Dr. Barnes, let's start with you. Call to action as we've been discussing this topic here today.
You know, when I asked volunteers in the past, they've always responded with, give me something I can do right now. And so if I could have a magic wand, there would easily be an opportunity for community members like we have here to show up at our schools and read to a kid. Identity is powerful. Again, going back to my own life, one of the only reasons why I believe I'm in this position is because I saw somebody that looked like me and I said, I want to be you when I grow up. It would be amazing to see representation in our schools, spending time with our kids, high-fiving our kids, and reading to our kids, even if you have 20 minutes. Yeah. If you have more than 20 minutes, I would say it's the opportunity of forming a relationship with one of those schools where you can come on a regular basis. The grander scheme of things is I remind people this: there's rooms I can't get into. There's rooms I don't know. There's people I don't know. So as you're speaking to those individuals and you're in those rooms, remember schools like ours, schools that struggle, schools that have remarkable students and remarkable teachers, and individuals that care and love a whole lot. And as bills are being passed and as conversations are being had, don't forget those faces.
Love that. Dr. Trujillo.
Kind of along the same lines, I think a call to action is recognizing that there are some immediate barriers that kids coming from poverty face that other students don't, that are quick wins for those out in the community. Food insecurity, lack of appropriate resources or the necessary resources for personal hygiene are big. Transportation is big, childcare is big. Those are winnable battles for those of you in the community watching. You establish a relationship with your local school. If you could either be a direct service provider or contributor to assisting your local school with one of those 4 challenges, whether it's volunteering to cover an event and provide some supervision, you're one extra body that the administration might be able to open up a classroom and provide some childcare for a family. Or if you're a person of influence and means and you can connect your local school to a nonprofit or an organization in the community that could address some of these challenges, that's where the battle is going to be won and lost. So I would encourage everybody to really take a look at your local school and see what you can bring to the table to help them meet those challenges.
Stephanie, I love these. We're talking about solving problems at the community level. Go ahead, your call to action.
So I mentioned it, right? We need folks to wrap their arms around our schools and ultimately wrap their arms around our kids and families to get them to achieve. And I'm going to kind of tie it back because Dr. Barnes said something that was really powerful. Our kids can see the mountains, but they can't get to the mountaintop. We need our community to make sure that every single child can get to the mountaintop.
Absolutely. We want to thank you guys for joining us All in Education's Paque Sepas, the social determinants of education. As a reminder, we will continue building on the conversation every single month, bringing you a deep dive around each of these topics. Thank you so much, Stephanie, Dr. Barnes, Dr. Trujillo, for sharing your knowledge. And we know All in Education, of course, and Stephanie would like to thank our sponsor for helping keep these conversations possible.
Absolutely. Thank you so much to the Garcia Family Foundation. We can't do this work without their support and continued investment in expanding this effort. So we're really grateful.
Thank you all for watching. Make sure you tune in next month and we'll see you again.